Mr. Speaker, most New Zealanders wouldn't have known it from that speech, but that man, Mr. Finlayson, is the Attorney-General of New Zealand, whose sworn role is to uphold the New Zealand Bill of Rights. And what did we hear from the Attorney-General, Mr. Speaker? We heard the entire 10 minutes taken up with a speech that denigrated many prominent and respected New Zealanders. He attacked Dame Anne Salmon. Dame Anne Salmon, Mr. Finlayson, was voted unanimously as the New Zealander of the Year earlier this year. Dame Anne Salmon is a respected historian. He attacked Dr. Rodney Harrison. You know, Dr. Rodney Harrison is a QC. So is the Attorney-General, but the difference is that Dr. Rodney Harrison earned his QC. He didn't give it to himself. He didn't give it to himself.
Point of order.
Point of order.
That member is misleading the House. Under no circumstances did I give that rank to myself.
Mr. Speaker, there are other prominent people in the New Zealand Law Society, like Austin Forbes, who have spoken out against this legislation. Sir Geoffrey Palmer is regarded as the foremost constitutional expert in this country, but he apparently was wrong as well. Sir Bruce Ferguson used to run the GCSB. You might think he understood a little about it. But what we have seen that will alarm New Zealanders most in this debate is the absolute arrogance of the government that at no stage has listened and at no stage has sought what traditionally a government would seek in legislation of this nature, which is to earn cross-party support. You know, the Prime Minister, well qualified in law as we know, criticised the Law Society, the New Zealand Law Society, as knowing nothing about the law. He then criticised the Human Rights Commission. Mr. Finlayson, isn't it true that the role of the Human Rights Commission is to uphold, as the watchdog of human rights, the rights and the freedoms of New Zealanders? Yet what did John Key do? He threatened the funding of the Human Rights Commission. And then, Mr. Speaker, there was the Privacy Commissioner. The Privacy Commissioner, I knew for a long period of time as the Secretary of the New Zealand Cabinet, more than a decade. Her role also, Mr. Finlayson, is to uphold the rights and the freedoms of New Zealanders. She said this legislation is not ready, it's not appropriate, it needs a proper inquiry before it's proceeded with, and that the last thing that should happen is that this legislation is rushed through. And then there is Mr. David McDowell. Mr. David McDowell was the head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and he warned also that this legislation does not provide adequate safeguards to stop the GCSB abusing its powers. Now, I say to Mr. Finlayson, that is a group of people with considerable expertise, experience, and well respected by New Zealanders. And by denigrating those people, all the Attorney-General has succeeded in doing is increasing the concern of New Zealanders that this legislation does not find the balance between security and the protection of rights. You know, I said before, normally with this legislation, the Prime Minister of a country reaches out across the House and says, here is an agency that has powers unique in a democratic society to intrude into the freedoms of New Zealanders and the privacy of New Zealanders. Here is an agency unique in the fact that it's not subject to openness and transparency and accountability because of the nature of what it does. And I would like to bring the House together to find a way of getting the balance between security and the rights of New Zealanders. That Prime Minister came into the House and said correctly that Grant Robertson and I had met with the Deputy Head of Staff of his office. And we did. And we told them the Labor's position. Labor's position is, we accept there's a need for security agencies. We accept that they need to have the powers to do the job, but we also believe that before you give extended powers to these security agencies, there must be a full independent inquiry. And Paula Oliver, his Deputy Chief of Staff, said, yes, that's exactly what the Australians did. That's what she said. Paula Oliver said that's exactly what the Australians did. We're asking for nothing more than what our colleague Democracy Across the Tasman said was necessary before they gave their powers to their security agency. We said that we need to have proper scrutiny of how those security agencies work. Now, Dr Coleman, you will know that in the United Kingdom and in Australia, ministers are not allowed to sit on the Intelligence and Security Committee that has oversight over security agencies. In the United States, there are two agencies, neither of them controlled by the Executive, the Presidency, that exercise scrutiny over those agencies. New Zealand is unique in the democratic world, where it has a Prime Minister that is in charge of the committee, meaning to exercise scrutiny over the GCSB, where the minister that should be scrutinised is actually on the committee and chairs it. He sets the agenda. He restricts the times that that committee can meet. How many times, Mr Finlayson, has that committee met outside of the needs of this legislation? Rarely and briefly. By a Prime Minister that shows absolute contempt and arrogance for the process by not contributing to it when he is present. I know that because I've sat on the committee, Dr Coleman. I know that when a minister is in charge of an agency and you're scrutinising that minister should be appearing before the committee. He should not be chairing the committee. And then the committee said, Mr Finlayson will say, but we have recognised that problem, and what will happen? I will chair it. I will chair it, says Mr Finlayson. I have no confidence on the basis of your speech, Mr Finlayson, that you would do anything other than ingratiate yourself with the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, that member is repeatedly bringing the Speaker into the debate.
Listening.
And he's been here 45 years. He should
I'm on
know.
my feet. I'm the determinant of that. The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, the fact is that this Prime Minister and this national government has arrogantly decided it will impose its will on this House on the basis of only its own party's support and the support of two members of Parliament who are discredited and disgraced in this Parliament. And my challenge to Mr Dunn is this. Mr Dunn said 3 weeks ago, and I quote, "Under no circumstances will I support this legislation which gives the GCSB the power to spy on New Zealanders." Under no circumstances. That man has broken his promise to New Zealand. That man was sacked by the Prime Minister because he leaked the GCSB report. And the other man is John Banks, who told the country that he didn't know anything about the $50,000 donation from Kim.com, that he had personally flown by helicopter to that mansion in Helensville, the Prime Minister's electorate, to pick up and take. That was not the truth. That was a lie. Both of those members are discredited.
The member must withdraw that comment.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is this is legislation that does not provide adequate scrutiny. Mr Key on Campbell Live said that in the course of the interview that the GCSB would not be allowed to look at the content of communications when conducting their cybersecurity functions. That's wrong. That is wrong. And yet that man came into the House and said the opposition didn't understand the bill. And you know his answer to that? Not to change the law to prevent it, but to do his King John, that is before the Magna Carta Act, of saying, but I will not allow them to do that. If you don't want the GCSB to do that, Mr Finlayson, put it in the legislation. New Zealanders have no confidence in this Prime Minister. He appointed the head of the GCSB. He did not disclose the fact that it was a long-time personal friend. He said he hardly knew him when he'd been having dinner with him. How could we have confidence in that Prime Minister when his scrutiny of the GCSB is not open and transparent to actually do the right thing? If you have safeguards against the abuse of power by the GCSB, you put it in the legislation.
The member's time has expired.
Speaker.
I call Giro Flavel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.